وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So as always, we begin the Monday meeting by thanking you for taking the time out of your Monday evening to be with us, for us to make it possible for us to be together and to remind ourselves of some of the important aspects of our religion and to fulfill the meaning of the ayah which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the people who will attain salvation, and He describes them by saying وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Those who mutually enjoin each other to the truth, they encourage each other to follow the truth, they are constantly reminding each other regarding the truth and to be from the people who follow the truth, and they encourage each other to be patient. And let me begin by saying that we'll be continuing our discussion of how the shaitan practices his enmity upon Adam and his progeny. And this is a talk, I've had some people who have suggested that we abandon this series of discussions, this topic, and that we turn our attentions to what we call al-mutun. We turn our attentions to some of the small treatises that have been written by the scholars throughout history, particularly the classical ones. We turn our attention to those treatises, and we read them, comment upon them, and that the benefit would be greater if we did so. And these treatises, there's no question that they're of the utmost importance and value. But to be honest with you, this topic that we're talking about, the topic of the shaitan, and how the shaitan manipulates us, realizing what his tricks are so we can avoid those tricks, this is an extremely important and extremely valuable topic. And I hope we can embrace the importance of this topic and buy into it. And once we thoroughly study this topic and our behavior reflects that we have digested it, then we can certainly turn our attention to some of those mutun. About 2 weeks ago, we spent some time contemplating and pondering over the ayah from Surah Al-An'am, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says on the tongue of shaitan, or mentioning what the shaitan said, that he said, لَأُذِلَّنَّهُمْ وَلَآمُرَنَّهُمْ فَلْيُبَتِّكَنَّ آذَانَ الْأَنْعَامِ وَلَآمُرَنَّهُمْ فَلْيُغَيِّرُوا خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. Spend a lot of time on the ayah in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the shaitan said regarding man or Adam and his progeny, I will misguide them, I will take them away from the straight path, and I will command them so that they will sever, they will cut the ears of cattle, and I will command them so that they change the fair nature created by Allah. Spend a lot of time on that, and in the following week we answer some questions, some follow-up questions about that ayah. I received 4 more questions via email, and I would be remiss if I did not answer those questions. So we'll start out by answering those questions, and then we'll resume our discussion on the topic of how the shaitan practices enmity toward Adam and his progeny. So the first question the brother asked, and these questions came from the brother Latif, who's a PhD student at USC. I hope if he's not here, that he's watching. So the first question he said was, you explained how tattoos are prohibited for Muslim women. Does Islam say anything about permissibility or otherwise of the same for Muslim men? And is there any type of tattoo acceptable for either men or women? Second question was, some people are born naturally with locks. And from my understanding, if the hair is cut after the 7th day of birth, the locks won't grow again. What does Islam say about keeping locks by Muslim men especially? Third question, piercing of the nose. I was told it's acceptable for Muslim women. I don't know how correct that is. Is piercing the separation between the two nostrils also acceptable? So typically when we talk about piercing the nose, we're talking about a piercing on the outside of one side of the nose. So he's specifically asking about a piercing between the nostrils. So for example, a person will pierce and then they'll have a ring that may hang down. He's asking, is that acceptable as a form of beautification? His fourth and final question is, last Monday he says, you mentioned about delaying saying the truth to a person for the fear that he may leave Islam if he is doing something unacceptable. Is there any time it is encouraged to say the truth irrespective of how the person feels about it, or should we just continue to play along in perpetuity? These are very good questions, and so we'll try to answer them ala ujala. So the first question he asked was about the prohibition of tattooing, which is largely based upon the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, in which he said that the Prophet ﷺ said, لَعْنَ اللَّهُ الْوَاشِمَاتِ وَالْمُسْتَوْشِمَاتِ. Allah's curse be upon the women who do tattooing and those who get tattooed. And so he asked, he says that the hadith talks about women. Is it equally prohibited for men? And is there any type of acceptable tattoo? So the answer is from a number of angles. First of all, we would say that the ruling is, or tattooing is equally prohibited for both men and women. So just like women cannot be tattooed, men cannot be tattooed, nor should they take tattooing as a profession. And we say that the evidence for that is from a few angles. Number one, the general qa'idah, the general rule in Islam is that al-aslu أن ما ثبت في حق الرجال فهو ثابت في حق النساء والعكس كذلك. That the original rule says that whatever is confirmed regarding women is equally applicable to men, and whatever is confirmed regarding men is equally applicable to women, unless there is evidence to the contrary. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there's another qa'idah that says al-hukmu يدور الحكم يدور مع علته وجودا وعدما. That the ruling for something, it comes and goes. It is eternally linked to the justification for it, the reasoning behind it. وجودا, present, وعدما, and absent, which means if the illah is there, the justification and the basis for the ruling is there, then the ruling applies. If the justification or basis is not there, the ruling will not apply. It will not be applied. So, what is the illah? What is the reason, the justification the scholars have given for the prohibition of tattooing? One, the majority of the scholars say that tattooing is a type of taghyir li khalqillah, is a type of changing of the creation of Allah, and that's supported by the context of the hadith of Mas'ud. So he said that the Prophet ﷺ said, لَعْنَ اللَّهُ الْوَاشِمَاتِ وَالْمُسْتَوْشِمَاتِ, and at the end of the hadith he mentioned a few other people, and then he said الْمُغَيِّرَاتِ لِخَلْقِ اللَّهِ. وَعَلَيْكُمْ السَّلَامُ. He said that Allah's curse be upon the women who take tattooing as a profession and those who get tattooed. And then he went on to say at the end of the hadith, he said those who change the creation of Allah. So this is the primary illah that the scholars have cited for the prohibition of tattooing. The second illah that the scholars have mentioned, another illah, is that فيه إخفاء للعيوب وغشا وتزييفا. That some of the scholars say that when a person gets tattooed, they are in effect concealing defects, they're practicing deception and deceit, and they're they're committing misrepresentation of themselves. Similar to when women would put spaces between their teeth, and they would do other changes to themselves, for example, extensions in their hair, etc. These are all considered a type of ghish, a type of misrepresentation, deception, fraud, etc. So it's another illah. And the last illah that the scholars have mentioned is that tattooing in effect is a type of ta'deebun al-jism. It's a type of self-mutilation or self-torture bila haja, without a legitimate need. And so all of these are illah that the scholars have mentioned to say that this is the reason why tattooing has been prohibited. And it could be any one of them or all of them combined. Now we have to ask ourselves, this illah or these illah, these justifications or bases, are they applicable for both men and women? Yes. Yeah. So if the illah is present, we said in the beginning that if the justification is present, is applicable, then the ruling is applicable. And so therefore, to answer the brother's question, yes, tattooing is prohibited for both males and females. And the reasoning is because the reason why it's prohibited is applicable to both males and females. Everybody see that? Does that make sense? Also, we have, like I said at the beginning, we have the principle that says that whatever is confirmed for women is confirmed for men, and whatever is confirmed for men is confirmed for women, unless we have proof to the contrary. Sounds like somebody has a question. If I understand your follow-up question, you said that for some people that this is a part of their culture. Is that correct?
Yes, and like also henna or even temporary tattoo, not just temporary, but permanent tattoo, like a lot of Polynesian, a lot of African, a lot of South Asian, really a lot of cultures throughout that tattooing is with their own cultural ties. That's what they do traditionally. That's what they do. So what would you, Abd'Llah, what would you say about that?
Okay, as far as henna is concerned, henna is not considered from al-washim. Washim is something that goes beneath the skin. It's not something that sits on top of the skin. It's also something which is permanent. It's not something which is temporary. So henna is not a part of our discussion, and henna is certainly permitted in Islam. As far as the fact that some people, tattooing is embedded in their culture. What Islam says regarding culture is that Islam says that people are free to practice their cultural traditions, provided that those cultural traditions do not contradict or conflict directly or indirectly with Islamic teaching. So if a person from one of these cultures were to become Muslim, and they already had tattoos, and removing those tattoos was a hardship, then they would not necessarily be expected or required to remove them. But for a person to be from that culture and become a Muslim, and then say, I'm going to get tattoos, whether they don't have any and they want to get some, or they have some and they want to get new ones, and to say that, well, I can do this because of my cultural traditions, that cultural tradition, that would be wrong, because Islam and Islamic teaching supersede all cultural traditions. And Islam does not bow to the cultural traditions. The cultural traditions are supposed to bow to Islam. So to complete the answer to the brother's question, he said, are there any permissible forms of tattooing? And tattooing in the sense of what we mean, the permanent tattoo that goes under the skin, the only permissible form would be, the only one I can picture or envision, would be a tattooing that was done daruratan. It was done out of extreme necessity. A person was basically compelled to do it for example, if a person had to be tattooed as a type of ilaj, as a type of treatment for some type of illness. I don't know if such a thing exists, but that would be an example of a permissible tattooing. Why? Because the general principle is that if a person is forced to do something haram, then that haram thing no longer becomes haram because of what? Because of the necessity, the extreme need. And the qaida that says, ad-darurat tubih al-mahdurat, that extreme necessity makes what is normally illegal, legal. But the second question that the brother asked was with respect to locks. Locks for men. And we talked about this extensively, and we said that at the end of the day it was permissible, provided that there was no shuhra, that it does not become something which it attracts negative attention to the person, or something which in effect, because of the environment in which he lives, it becomes a type of tashabbuh, type of imitating the kuffar, imitating the non-Muslims. So if it is a hairstyle which is specific in the place where he lives, and the time which he lives, specific to the non-Muslim, such that anybody who sees a person wearing that hairstyle would say, this person is from this religion other than Islam, they automatically associate that hairstyle with being a non-Muslim. It would not be permissible. But in the absence of these two cases, it would be acceptable. We talked about that last week. But number 3 from his questions was about a nose ring through the nostril. Personally, my feeling is that this is likely falls under the category of a tashabbuh, of the prohibited mimicking or resembling or imitating of the non-Muslims, because this is not something which is known amongst the Muslims. Do the Muslims do nose rings? Yes, but not in this way, not through the nostrils. They do the nose rings on the right or left side of the nose. And so, yahtamil, as they say, it's plausible, it's conceivable that it could be seen as imitating the non-Muslims, because they're the only ones, as far as I know, that do this. But if a person lives in a place where it is done by both what? Muslims and non-Muslims, or it's done by Muslims primarily, and there's no fear of a tashabbuh, of the prohibited mimicking or resembling of the non-Muslims, and there is no fear of shuhra, as we said earlier, then it would be permissible, because the asl, as we talked about before, the original rule when it comes to these types of things is permissibility. So again, if there's no tashabbuh, there's no prohibited imitation of the non-Muslims, there's no shuhra, there's no inviting of negative attention, it would be permitted. But there's another concern, and that is, as the brother said, it's being worn as a type of adornment, a type of beautification, a woman beautifying herself by wearing the ring in this way. And so if she does that, it's not something that should be worn in public, in front of her non-maharim, her non-relative male, non-relative males, not her non-relative, but non-relative males. وَيَدُلِّ ذَلِكَ, and this is evidenced by the ayah in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says regarding women, وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا. They should not display their beauty and ornaments, except what ordinarily appears thereof. إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا. What is the meaning of إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا? According to Aisha radiallahu anha, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, and Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, the meaning of إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا is al-wajh, face, wal-kaffayn, and the two hands. This is what a woman is allowed to display. And according to one of them, they also included al-hinna, right, the dyeing of the hands, and the dyeing of the hands. And they also included al-khatim. They also included a ring that a woman might wear. They considered this acceptable beauty or adornments that a woman could show. Outside of that, they didn't consider it. So if a woman adds a layer of beauty to her face through using maquillage, for example, she uses makeup, and she makes herself more beautiful, eyeliner, and she uses, not eyeliner, eyeshadow, and she uses blush, and she puts on lipstick, etc. So she enhances the beauty of her face. This is another layer of beauty that has to now be what? has to be covered, because Allah says illa ma bahara minha, and ma bahara minha, according to the scholars amongst the Sahaba, is what? The face, unbeautified, and the hands, and al-hinna, and al-khatam. So that said, if a woman adds beauty to her face, like in the case of this ring, she would have to what? Not either come outside with her face covered, not showing it, or she would have to take it out when she goes outside in the public, in the front of men to whom she's not related. The last question he asked was about the statement that we made last week. Someone asked about an example of al-mudarat, when a person leaves something from the truth for a religious benefit. And we gave the example of a person who becomes a Muslim and they have tattoos, and you just feel like it wouldn't be from hikmah, from wisdom, to tell them that they can't have tattoos because that may cause them to leave Islam. So he basically asked, well, do we just continue doing this for perpetuity? Or is there an instance or a time or a point at which you just tell them the truth, irrespective of how they'll react? So basically my response to that would be to say, if you're not speaking the truth, you should be doing it for a sabab, for a reason. And if that reason ceases to be applicable, then your refraining from speaking should cease. The second thing is that sometimes the wisdom necessitates that you speak. And so if wisdom necessitates that you speak, if it's better at this point to speak, you speak. Or sometimes the matter that you're being quiet about is a matter which you're not permissible. You're not permitted to be quiet about. So in that case, you have to speak. So it's a situational thing. It depends on the circumstances, and there's no one right answer. But if there's someone who's a new Muslim, and you refrain from telling him about a specific thing because you want to give him time for his iman to grow, so that he can be told that this is prohibited and he will be able to withstand it and then do it or comply with it, I should say, then that's perfectly acceptable. And that doesn't mean that we do this forever. The person's been Muslim for 10 years and we keep telling people, don't tell him. No, that's not what we mean. We mean that there's going to be a point in time where you assess that yes, this person is ready to hear the truth, and you tell them the truth. So with that said, we'll get back to our discussion. And tonight we're going to look at the ayah from Surah Al-Isra, and we've mentioned it a few times but have not discussed it in detail. The ayah from Surah Al-Isra, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقُلْ لِعِبَادِي يَقُولُ الَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ يَنزَغُ بَيْنَهُم إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ كَانَ لِلْإِنسَانِ عَدُوًّا مُبِينًا. He says, and say to my servants that they should say that which is best, for indeed the devil sows discord amongst them. Indeed, Satan is to man a manifest enemy. So tonight, what I want to talk about, and this is probably going to be a two-part discussion. Tonight we're going to set the table, and next week, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to delve deeper into the topic. But I want to talk about, again, how Satan practices his enmity on Adam and his progeny. But specifically tonight I want to talk about actions. More specifically, I want to talk about the interpretation of actions and how that process of interpreting actions, whether our own or those of others, impacts the relationships we have with them. I'm going to say that again. Tonight I want to talk about actions. Things that people do. That includes things that they say, but it's more so things that they do without saying anything. More importantly, or more specifically, I want to talk about the interpretation of actions, whether those actions are our own or those of others, and how that process impacts the relationships we have with those people. And moreover, how Shaitan uses this knowledge to practice his enmity against us. how Shaitan uses its knowledge of the ability to what? To interpret and to misinterpret and to basically twist the interpretation, how he uses that against us to affect our relationships with others. And honestly, brothers and sisters, this is an important topic, because what is life except a collection of relationships? It's a relationship with Allah. It's a relationship or relationships with our fellow man. It's a relationship with the environment, and so on and so forth. And these relationships, if we look in our own community, we see how when these relationships are not functioning as they should, it causes the community to stagnate and not to achieve its full potential. The relationship between, for example, the Imam and the community and the Imam, some of the members of the community with other members of the community, this affects the ability for the community to achieve what? Its objectives. And we have to know, brothers and sisters, that actions communicate messages and convey meanings. We have to acknowledge that. We have to, first of all, we have to admit that. People do things for a reason. You guys agree with that? When somebody does something, do it for a reason. Or they might do it for multiple reasons. And we know this because the Prophet said in the hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. He said, actions are but by intentions, which means whenever a person does something, unless that action is completely inadvertent or it's accidental, whenever they do something, they do it for a reason. They do it to achieve a purpose. You guys see that? A person gets up and extends their arm to the doorknob and they twist it. They're doing that to do what? To open the door. They're doing it for a reason. People just don't get up and start twisting on the knob and just looking off into space. They're doing it because they want to open the door. They do these actions for a reason. And deep down, brothers and sisters, if we might try to deny it, but deep down we're convinced that if a person does something, they did it for a reason. You know how I know deep down we're all convinced of this? Because as soon as somebody does something, we immediately try to do what? We try to interpret it. We immediately try to interpret what did they mean when they did that. But what we have to acknowledge, and this is something very important for us to succeed in not being defeated by the shaitan or not allowing the shaitan to use this weapon against us, it's very important for us to acknowledge that interpreting actions is very difficult to do. Knowing what a person really meant when they did something without asking them, it's difficult. It's difficult. It's a crapshoot. And there's a number of reasons for that. And I want to talk about those reasons to set the table for our discussion next week. First one is because actions in general carry a number of conceivable or plausible interpretations. And we recognize that some interpretations are more plausible than others, but generally when people do something, the things that they do are open to interpretation. So for example, let's say that you come into the masjid and you see me. And you say, Assalamu alaikum, brother. And I do like this. Okay? That action, you could interpret it as he's ignoring me. He's purposely not responding to me. He saw me and he ignored me. But it's also possible that I heard the voice, I didn't see where it's come from because I'm nearsighted. I can see things close, but I can't see things far. You guys see that? So I heard Assalamu alaikum, brother, and I looked to see if somebody said it from over there. I didn't actually see you, but you think I saw you because our eyes met, but I didn't really see you. You guys see that? So that's one example out of many examples to give just from this scenario of how you could interpret it one way, but the reality will be something else. Why? Because actions are open to multiple interpretations. You guys see that? It's also possible that just before you said Salam Alaikum and you came inside, I sneezed. And maybe something was coming out of my nose. And so when you said Salam Alaikum, nobody was here. Then you came and I'm embarrassed. So I turned away. So I could clean myself and I could be more presentable. That's another possibility. You guys see that? And we could keep on giving possibilities. Actions are what? That actions generally have more than one, in many cases, several conceivable interpretations. But another reason why actions are difficult to interpret is because they can be influenced by our perception or our feelings toward the actor. You guys understand that? Or do I need to say that again? But actions, well, another thing that makes it really difficult for us to nail down what did the person mean when they did that, is the fact that in many cases when we we witness an action, the way that we interpret it is influenced by our perception or our feelings toward the one who did it. Is that not so? Is that not so? If you like somebody and they do something that could be interpreted in a positive or negative way, if you like them, you're more likely to do what? To interpret in a positive way. Isn't that so? Oh, he didn't mean it like that. Because you like them, or you're linked to them. There's some type of connection to them. But if you don't like them, or there's some
beef.
Okay, you could say beef if you like that word. Yeah, beef, we could say that. Or you're disconnected to them. If you don't like them, you're disconnected to them, whatever, or disconnected from them, I should say, then you're more likely to interpret those actions, which could be interpreted positively or negatively, you're more likely to interpret them in a what? In a negative way. Is that not so? I'll give you an example. Former president. The former president. This guy is extremely polarizing. Former president was extremely polarizing. You either liked him or you hated him. Is that not so? There weren't too many people like, I'm not sure. Jury's still out on him. No. You either liked him or you hated him. Tayyib. He made a lot of comments that could be construed as racist or bigoted. A lot of comments like that. The people who don't like him or didn't like him were quick to interpret his statements as what? As racist. That's what he's a racist. And that statement is a racist statement. Right? They were quick to do that. And the people who liked him were reluctant, to say the least, and in many cases they just outright refused to acknowledge that he made a statement of racism. And there was never anybody in the middle, well, I really got to think. No, it was always either, he's a bigot. No, he's not a bigot. Why? Because I like him. I'm sorry, I dislike him. I like him. You guys see that? That's another reason why it's difficult for us, because that the fact that we like or dislike a person prevents us from what? It blurs our vision and causes us not to be fair, to be biased. You guys see that? That's important for us to bear in mind, because who's going to use that bias to his benefit? The shaitan. He's going to use that bias to his benefit and interpret the actions of the actor in the worst way if that benefits him. Or even sometimes in the best way if it benefits him. See, for example, we talked a lot about these celebrity imams and how some of the outlandish statements that they make. People like them so much that when they say kufr, they say something which is disbelief, people nod their heads. And the shaitan uses the fact that they like them to make them interpret these words which are disbelief in a way where they can somehow swallow it. You guys see that? At any rate, the shaitan's going to use the fact that our perception and our biases, he's going to use that in his favor. Tayyib. Another thing that makes interpreting actions particularly difficult is that the action itself doesn't tell the whole story. When somebody does something, that action itself doesn't tell us the whole story. There's usually additional what? Context, right? There's other things that are at play that led the person to do the action that we're likely unaware of. You guys see that? Unaware of. In addition to this, actions can be influenced by emotions. Is that not so? That a person can do something and that's emotionally driven and not necessarily reflective of a person's beliefs or their character. Does that happen? Do people sometimes do things that's out of character, that's not really who they are, but they do that? Does that happen? Certainly it happens. It also, some people do things because of their heightened emotional state that they do it, but they don't have any malicious intent. But rather they do it because there's a lapse of judgment or an irrational reaction to a heightened emotional state or some emotional or other trauma. Can that happen? It can happen. I'll give you an example. I'm going to mention to you guys ala ujala the qissa, the story of Hatib ibn Abi Balta'a. Hatib ibn Abi Balta'a. He was a Sahabi, Badri. He was somebody who participated at Badr. And he was a companion, loyal companion. He wasn't a hypocrite. When the Prophet ﷺ was planning to do the conquest of Mecca, to go ahead and march to Mecca and conquer it, seize it, he made it a point to conduct his operations secretly. He swore the Muslims to secrecy as they planned so that they would catch the Quraysh and the pagans of Mecca off guard. Hatib, he, unlike many of the Prophet's companions, was not Qurayshi. He was not from Quraysh, and he didn't have any relatives from Quraysh. And he wasn't somehow a distant relative of Quraysh, but he had family in Mecca. And he feared that if they found out, they would harm his family. They found that the Prophet was going to attack them and they somehow were victorious. They would harm the families of the Muslims who participated in the conquest or the attempted conquest. So he thought to himself, in that instance of heightened emotional state and wanting to protect his family, he thought to himself, what if I wrote them a letter and I told them what the Prophet's going to do? If Allah wants him to get victory, he'll be victorious regardless of what I do. But if he somehow, some way, was not successful, the Quraysh would look favorably upon what I did and they wouldn't hurt my family. So he wrote the letter. And of course, Allah revealed to the Prophet that he had sent the letter by a female courier. He had her stop. They brought the letter back. They brought the letter to the Prophet Muhammad. They read it out to him and he summoned Hatib. And he told him, he said, Ma hada ya Hatib. He said, what is this? He didn't. Now, I'm going to ask you honestly. If you are in an army and you give secrets, you give the secrets of that army to an enemy government, what is that called? Treason. What do? They assassinate, right? So basically, if you look at it on the surface, Hatib committed treason, an act punishable by death. Got it? When he was brought before the Prophet, did the Prophet say, Udrubhu unuqahu? Go ahead and cut him down. Did the Prophet say that? No, he said, Ma hada ya Hatib. He said, explain yourself. Explain this, ya Hatib. So Hatib, he said, La ta'jal alayya. He said, O Messenger of Allah, I know how this looks. I know it looks really, really bad, but it's not what you think it is. Give me a chance to explain. So he said, he gave the story. I had a family and I was worried and I thought, you would be successful, but if you weren't successful, he gave the whole story, the whole spiel. So then he said at the end of his spiel, he said, Ya Rasulullah lam af'alhu kufran wa la irtidadan an al-Islam wa la ridan bil kufr ba'd al-Islam. So he said, Messenger of Allah, you have to know, I didn't do this because I'm a disbeliever, or I didn't do it as a form of apostasy. I didn't do it because I'm pleased with kufr and I support disbelief. I didn't do it for any of those reasons. After becoming a Muslim, I'm a faithful Muslim. I just did it for this material gain. I did it because I was in this heightened emotional state, concerned about my family. I had no malicious intent. You know what the Prophet said? Sadaq. He said, he told the truth. He's telling the truth. You know what Omar said? Omar said, Da'ni ya Rasulullah, adrib unuq hadha al-munafiq. He said, let me, O Messenger of Allah, please allow me, give me permission to cut off the head of this hypocrite. So then the Prophet said, whoa, Umar. He said, إِنَّهُ شَهِدَ بَدْرًا. He said, this is a man who fought with us at Badr, the first battle of Islam. وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ. And what would let you know? أَنَّ اللَّهَ اطَّلَعَ عَلَى أَهْلِ بَدْرٍ فَقَالَ لَهُمْ إِفْعَلُوا مَا شِئْتُمْ فَقَدْ غَفَرْتُ لَكُمْ. He said, and what will let you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He looked favorably at the people who fought in that first battle, outnumbered, in a situation where most people would say, you know what, another day. They fought anyway, and they won. And Allah looked at them favorably and said, do whatever you wish, because I forgive you. But so what can we see from this story that matches up with what we just talked about? One, actions have meaning. Because the Prophet said, Ma hada. He said, what is this? Meaning what? You did this for a reason. There's a meaning. But he's also telling us the meaning is often hard to what? Interpret. The Prophet is admitting, I'm not really sure how this is supposed to be interpreted, so I have to ask you, Ma hada. You guys see that? The Prophet is teaching us that people do things and we consider the thing they did as mustankar, something repugnant, something unacceptable, something abhorrent. We look at it like that on the surface, but it's more to it than that. These actions are not as easy to interpret as we might think, and in many cases, our interpretation is incorrect and even way off base. It's not always what we think or the way it seems, which is why the Prophet said, when Umar saw it, he immediately said, this is a munafiq. Was he right? No, he was wrong. But then the Prophet said, sadaq. He said he spoke the truth. And that shows that when he gave him the context, the Prophet was able to what? To properly interpret or properly determine how the action should be interpreted, which means it shows the importance of context. Somebody does something, I'm not going to rush to judgment until what? Until I know all the details. Brother, I came in, I gave you salam, you looked the other way, I felt a certain type of way. Akhi, I did not see you. I heard you and looked over here thinking the voice came from over here. Now you know that context. Do you feel different? You feel different. But you could have came in and said, you know what? He turned the other way. You know what? I'm going to turn the other way. I'll never speak to him again. You just go over here and pray. And he's like, what happened? I speak to the brother, he didn't speak to me more. Because you allow yourself to make that assumption, you don't follow up and get the context, what happens to your relationship? The relationship gets spoiled. Sour. Who wins? Shaitan. Y'all see that? We also learn from the qissa of Hatib that a person's actions are not necessarily a reflection of their beliefs or character. Hatib was a sincere believer. He believed in Islam. He just what? He had a lapse of judgment. There was no malicious intent. You see it clearly. The Prophet said, Sadaq. He told the truth. And he said, Ma fa'altu kufran. He said, Wallahi, Rasulullah, I didn't do this out of disbelief. I didn't do this as an act of apostasy. I believe in Islam. I love Islam. I was worried about my family. Y'all see that? Not a reflection of what? My beliefs and my true character. What I'm really about. A person can also do something we learned from this for purely emotional reasons, motivated by material concerns. It was all about what? My family. Saving my family. Something material caused me to what? To compromise my spiritual standing. And also because the Prophet said, he said, Ya Umar, whoa. This guy participated at Badr. It's like the Prophet is telling Umar in a roundabout way. We can't define him by the worst thing he's ever done. We got to define him by what? By the best thing he's ever done. Y'all see that? So look at the difference. The Prophet is kind of teaching us how we have to be careful with these interpretations because it can lead us down the wrong path and destroy what? Destroy our relationships. The thumb by that doesn't mean, it's critical for me to say, it doesn't mean that wrong actions somehow become what? Become right. It doesn't mean that. It didn't mean in the case of Hatib, because the Prophet said at the end of the hadith, وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ لَعَلَّ اللَّهَ اطَّلَعَ عَلَى أَهْلِ بَدْرٍ فَقَالَ إِفْعَلُوا مَا شِئْتُمْ فَقَدْ غَفَرْتُ لَكُمْ. He mentioned that Allah looked favorably to the people of Badr and said, do whatever you will because I've forgiven you. Forgiven you because you did good? Forgiven you if you do something bad. The Prophet mentions it in this context of saying that what Hatha did is what? Is wrong. So the Prophet's not saying, well, because you had good intentions, it makes it right. No, it's wrong, but he's going to be forgiven. Why? Because of the totality of what motivated him, the totality of the context. You guys see that? Like, finally, actions can be hard to interpret because their interpretation is often influenced, I should say. Their interpretation is often influenced by our experiences. Y'all hear that? And a lot of times we interpret what we see in light of our experience. Like, our experiences become like a lens. You guys ever seen those those mirrors that when you look into it, it makes you real skinny? And then you have another mirror that you look into it, it makes you what? Fat. Y'all see that? And then you have the mirror that makes you look like an hourglass. So you're fat on top, skinny in the middle, and then fat on the bottom. You guys see that? So it's almost like your experiences become something like that. When you look through it, it alters what? The image that you see. Exactly. It distorts. It distorts the image you see. So you see the action different than other people see it. Why? Because you're looking at it through the lens of your experiences. Now, I know this is like vague and abstract, so I'm going to give you an example. Let's say, for example, right, that in your experience, you've had someone promise you something. They make a promise. And then they postpone the fulfillment of the promise. Somebody says, hey, man, I'm going to take you to dinner on Friday. Me and you, we can go to dinner. Friday comes, man, I need to take a rain check. How about Sunday? Say, okay, how about Sunday? I'm free. Sunday comes, oh man, something came up. I tell you what, how about Wednesday? How about next Friday? Friday comes, you meet him, you're at the restaurant, and you're waiting and never shows up. And the waiter's like, look, we need to use it or lose it, brother. You know what I mean? Order or we're going to have to ask you to leave. And then you text or call the brother. He's like, you know what, brother, it wasn't meant to be. So you have this experience. So now you have another experience with somebody else where they promise you, they say, hey, man, they got the auto show downtown this week and next week. What you say, man? I got 2 tickets. Why don't we go together? So, okay, that's cool. Then he says we're gonna go on Thursday, the first day of the show. So then he calls you and says, hey, I can't do it Thursday. How about Saturday? Immediately, you're like, you know what? Forget it, man. Why you say forget it? Because you think, oh, you're gonna do just like the other brother, keep kicking the can down the road and ultimately not fulfill your promise. So our perception of the postponement, this person really, the second person is sincerely committed to following through. I got 2 free tickets and I want to take you. Out of all the brothers I could take with me, I want to take you. I just can't do it Thursday. Something really, really did come up. I had a family emergency. I can't do it tonight. If it wasn't something that I didn't have to handle, I would keep my word. Saturday we're going. By hook or by crook. You're like, no, that's all right, I'm cool. Use a ticket with somebody else. The experience that you have with the first person influences how you view the action of this person. The postponement as an action is based upon what? The experience you have with the other person, which is not fair. We're projecting onto somebody else. This person did this to me, you can ready to do the same thing. Right? Just because the circumstances kind of look similar. And we can give like a bunch of practical examples, and maybe we should give one example because I want to see, let me give an example. Another example where we'll go through this together. And we'll see how the shaitan plays tricks on us, right? Let's say, for example, you had a friend in the community. Friend in the community, and you guys were friends, and everything was good. And all of a sudden, that friend started hanging out with a brother named, we'll call him Brother X. And the more he hung out with Brother X, the more he became estranged. The more he became distant. And pretty soon, you guys weren't friends anymore. Not even the basic salam, how you doing? None of that. When you started hanging out with Brother X. So you develop a friendship with another brother. And everything is going good, and all of a sudden you see that brother hanging out with Brother X. And this brother, typically, you call or text every day or every other day. 2 days don't go by and you haven't been in touch with this particular brother, and then some time goes by and you don't hear from him. And he's been hanging out with brother X. So you call them, not answering. Leave him voice message, no reply. Send a text, no response. What's going on here? What's going on here, brothers? What y'all think?
Brother X.
It's brother X, right? It's brother X. Right? That's what we all think, right? I'm going to ask you honestly, though. Could our friend be sick, incapacitated, or have some type of emergency? Could that happen?
Yes.
Could it be that it could be that? It could have nothing to do with brother X. It could have something to do with something we did or said that we don't realize, right?
Maybe brother X made them sick.
Could be. But it could be, the point is that it's more than just what? Brother X is not the only possible interpretation, but immediately our mind goes where? Because of what? Because of our experience. You guys see that? So, I say all this to say that the shaitan, he uses our natural inclination to interpret actions, which are hard to interpret, and the fact that we don't pay attention to how hard it is to interpret them. He uses that in his favor to get us to interpret the action in the way that suits his desires, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way, and then ultimately to destroy what? Our relationships. Now I want you to think about that, because I'm going to stop here and open the floor for any discussion. I want you to think about that in light of a couple things that I've observed in the short time I've been in the community. And that is the relationship between the Imam and the community, the relationship between the community and the Imam, and the relationship between members of the community, some of them, towards others. I'm going to ask you honestly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I'm misinterpreting. My perception is off. Would you say that those relationships are good? They're where they should be? Yes, no, maybe so.
Yes.
Tell me, what do you think? What do you think, Muhammad? Where they should be? That's a fair answer. I like that answer. That's a safe answer.
Yeah. No, but I really don't know because I know this from my experiences.
Hey.
Not really,
Hey.
But really I don't know.
Okay, now you and the Imam, that's you and the Imam. I'm talking about the community as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Not you as an individual. But like, what do you think, Hamza? I don't want to put you on the spot. You can do like a vote. I don't know.
Gotta have a relationship with Allah
Sir?
first.
Sir?
Relationship with the house of Allah.
Hey. I mean, we can throw those in too. Is our relationship with Allah right? Yeah.
It's one of those things, you know, you're dealing with those things first. So,
Hey.
you know,
But do you, I guess my question is, because everything you're saying is 100% right, but would you say, let's focus, I guess, upon the community itself, the relationship, some of the members of the community with others. Do you think that's where it should be Islamically?
I think there's always room for improvement.
Hey. So you think it's good, but it could be better, or you think it's poor, and
You know,
it could be moved toward good?
One knows best, but
Hey.
in my experience, it could always be better, it could always be worse.
Hey.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay.
Nobody's perfect. You can never satisfy groups.
Hey.
You know, if you got one or two people, yeah, you can cater to that. But when you're talking about community as a whole, that's a couple hundred.
So?
There's gonna be some people that's not happy.
It's not about necessarily being happy. It's about how they interact with one another, how they work together,
I mean,
or the lack of cooperation, collaboration, working together.
It stretches out further than community. I mean,
Eh.
people are just growing away from each other.
Eh.
People are growing into a I'm gonna do me sort of mindset.
Eh.
That ain't none of my business type of deal.
And where does that come from, you think?
I mean, that's Shaitan's handiwork.
Yeah, there's no question.
That's his goal right there.
And do you think that the interpretation of action plays a role in that? That pushes us apart?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're saying the same thing. We're speaking the same. We're speaking the same language.
I say this.
Hold up.
It's becoming more and more of a saying these days. I feel a certain kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
Hey.
Oh, you know, I was talking to so and so, man. I can't help it, but I'm starting to feel a certain kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And subhanAllah, maybe 3 months ago, I was telling my wife, it came to me one day like I was feeling a certain kind of way.
Subhanallah.
And I told her that, and I was like, what does that even mean? You know?
Okay.
And I said, that's from Shaitan.
When you live that experience, yeah, when you
Because
yeah.
what does that mean? You interpreting something that you don't really,
Ahsan.
you don't know exactly what it could be.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably more negative than positive in your mind
Mm-hmm.
because of your lenses.
Yeah.
But you don't know, and now you nutshelling down the. I'm feeling a certain kind of way.
Feeling certain kind of way? Yeah.
Go find out.
Exactly like it. But anybody else want to chime in? You're pointing over there. Why are you pointing? Like, so, walaikum salam. So, we're getting close to the adhan. Anybody else want to have a comment about that? Nasir.
Well, it doesn't really have much to do about that. It's back to the dreads.
Okay.
So, do you not think that the dreads might have the Rastafarians, or
Mhm.
do you think they might have that might have a big deal to do with the popularization of that that type of hairstyle?
It is possible. It is possible. But what in Islam, what Islam looks at to determine whether or not something is classified as being from the prohibited, prohibition or mimicking or resembling of the non-Muslims is not the origin. It's the reality of the particular thing in question at the time that the question is being raised. So if at that time it becomes what we call mushtaraka, something which is done by both Muslims and non-Muslims, it wouldn't fall in the category, it wouldn't be considered or classified by the scholars of Islam as the prohibited mimicking. And I'm going to give you an example from some years ago. When the British first colonized India, the Indians did not wear pants, like Western pants. You know, the Western style, they didn't wear them. And they didn't eat with forks either. They did not. And the scholars at that time in India, the Muslim scholars, issued fatwa prohibiting the wearing of the Western style pants and eating with forks. Why? Because it was something unknown to the Muslims and something purely, exclusively European, non-Muslim, Euro-Christian practice. You guys, you see that? And at that time, that was the right call because it was what? It was khas. It was something specific, exclusive to them. Like fast forward now, 200 years, right? And here we are in 2021. Would it be appropriate for that fatwa to be issued now? To say that it's prohibited for Muslims living in America, for example, pretty much living all over the world, but particularly in America, for them to wear what we call pants and for them to eat with forks. Would it be correct?
Yes.
No, because over the course of time, the passage of time, these deeds became, or these actions became mushtaraka. Something that the Muslims do and the non-Muslims do, and not something that if somebody does it, you automatically identify them as being, for example, Christian or Euro-Christian. You see that? So once the action in question becomes mushtaraka, something which is common or a shared practice or a shared garment of clothing or a shared utensil for eating, it no longer becomes or is included or is categorized as the prohibited imitation or resembling. So the same thing with dreads. There was a time, you could argue, that nobody in the West was wearing dreads, if you allow me to use that language, wearing dreads except the Rastafari. You could argue that. Now that might have been something they were wearing in other parts of the world, that the Rastafarians took it from them. But in this part of the world, nobody was doing that. So you would say that if somebody did that, they were imitating them. But now, this hairstyle has become popular, and it's worn by Muslims, especially Afro-American Muslims, or you have, for example, Afro-Latino Muslims, right? Muslims from a type of Afro-cultural background will wear this hairstyle. And so because of that, because we could argue that it's become mushtaraka, something common across religious lines, spiritual lines, confessional lines, then we say that it's no longer something that we can say, mi'a fil mi'a, 100%, this is tashabbuh, you can't do it, etc. The times might change, the situation might change, and the ruling would change, because the ruling comes and goes with al-khususiyya, the exclusivity. If it's exclusive to them, then we're not supposed to be doing it. Does that make sense?
But some rulings never change. Some rulings never change.
Yeah, they never, and some rules never change. But as when it relates to tashabbuh specifically, the resembling, it's going to be governed by the commonality or lack thereof. If it becomes exclusive to them, then we're not supposed to be doing it. And with that, I think they're calling for the adhan. So with that, we'll bring today's session to a close. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. والليل إذا يغشى والنهار إذا تجلى وما خلق الذكر والأنثى إن سعيكم لشتى فأما من أعطى واتقى وصدق بالحسنى فسنيسره لليسرى وأما من بخل واستغنى وكذب بالحسنى فسنيسره للعسرى وما يغني عنه ماله إذا تردى إن علينا للهدى وإن لنا للآخرة والأولى فأنذرتكم نارا تلظى لا يصلاها إلا الأشقى الذي كذب وتولى وسيجنبها الأتقى. الله. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. إذا زلزلت الأرض زلزالها وأخرجت الأرض أثقالها وقال الإنسان ما لها يومئذ تحدث أخبارها بأن ربك أوحى لها يومئذ يصدر الناس أشتاتا ليروا أعمالهم فمن يعمل مثقال ذرة خيرا يره ومن يعمل مثقال ذرة شرا يره. الله. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر السلام عليكم ورحمة الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله
It's